Hello and welcome today to the Christian Construction Podcast. I'm Michael Lindsay. This is my friend, Brother Josh Montgomery, Brother Zack Nix. And today we're going to be talking about young men pastoring churches. What is it like for a young man to pastor a church? What are the expectations? What is the reality? What are the things that these men might be able to share with us today that would help us? So we hope you'll stay tuned today to the Christian Construction Podcast. All right. Thank you so much for tuning in today, or whatever day it is you're tuning in, maybe Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, Monday, whenever that is. We appreciate you tuning in and inviting us into your place of listening. Brother Josh, thank you for coming back and joining us again.
I'm glad I didn't get banned.
No. It's only because our pastor hasn't seen these. So. But we appreciate you coming back.
Yes,
and Brother
sir.
Josh was here with us a few weeks ago. At the time of this recording, it was a few weeks ago, and he was here with us for the revival meeting, big winter revival meeting, and he's been so kind and gracious to join us again, and we're actually recording a series of episodes together right now. This may be the first in those. It may be the second or third. I don't know. We don't know the future. This one may never make it to air.
No.
Just depends on what all you say.
That's exactly right.
Don't say player.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't say player.
Can't say player? You can't. So anyway, Brother Josh, of course, is the pastor of the Safe Harbor Baptist Church in Salisbury, North Carolina. And if you haven't met him, don't know much about him, go back to previous episodes and you'll see where we aired with him. I had an interview with him, talked about young preachers, their place in the ministry, and tried to give some advice from us to young preachers, someone that may be awaiting the next step in the ministry. And Brother Josh gave us really two good episodes. Again, at the time of this recording, I don't know if we've aired the one with him and Brother Chad Bailey, where we kind of picked up where we left off after that first one. I'm sure that it will have aired by the time this hits the air. Brother Zack Nix, who I was your counselor a couple years, I think. That's right. And now Brother Zack is pastoring down in. Is it in Travelers Rest?
It's in Liberty, South Carolina.
Liberty, South Carolina.
County, Liberty, South Carolina.
And there are only 172 churches in Pickens. No, I'm kidding.
That's true.
That may or may not be true. I don't know. Brother Zack is the pastor of the Roanoke Baptist Church in Liberty, South Carolina, where his granddad Jack Shook pastored for 35 plus years.
That's correct.
Brother Jack, of course, many of you, if you've never heard of him, then it would be your privilege to get to know him, find some of his preaching, and be encouraged. He is a giant of the faith as far as I'm concerned, a man who has stood and literally has fought. And if you haven't figured that out, if you'll find the Higher Grounds podcast Facebook page, you'll find the pictures of Brother Jack with the title belt. He is currently the heavyweight champion, world champion of fundamentalism. We didn't know that till yesterday evening. So, amen. Brother Zack, appreciate you joining us today. And again, this is a series of episodes where these men have been so kind and gracious to join us here on the podcast. And today we're going to be talking about a young man pastoring a church. I'm 37, never pastored, probably couldn't pastor a bird's nest. I don't know. I'm not really ready to find out what that's like because the Lord doesn't want me to do that. And so Brother Josh has been pastoring just celebrated his 7th year. He's been at Safe Harbor Baptist Church. It is the only church he's pastored. How old were you when you went there?
I was 21.
21, so you're 28 now. That's pretty good math.
That's very good.
It's football math, actually.
That's very good.
21 plus 7. Yeah. All right, and so and then Brother Zack was a kind of a unique situation, and we'll talk about that. Brother Josh was, your traditional, typical went candidate at the church, got voted in, and then Brother Zack's was a little different. We see both of these happening in churches of like faith, and so we're going to talk about some of that. Brother Josh, I'm just going to start with you. Maybe tell us, we know that you have given us your background as far as salvation, testimony, call to preach, but tell us about the candidating process, just in brief, and what the church, where they were at when you got there, and just maybe a brief history of former pastor, the situation you stepped into.
Right. Well, actually, me and my wife, we got married in September 2012. And during 2012, there was a Safe Harbor Baptist Church in Salisbury. Pastor Rick Perry was there. And in March of 2012, he wasn't feeling well one day and went to the doctor. Long story short, they diagnosed him with cancer. And that was in March of 12. Anytime he'd have chemotherapy, he would not be able to preach the following Sunday or maybe Wednesday. I'd go in and fill in for him. And in November of that year, his health declined even worse, and he called me and called my pastor first, and then called me and asked if I'd be interested in coming and being a supply pastor, pretty much a glorified assistant, fill the pulpit when he's not there on a more consistent basis. And so I prayed about it, counseled with my pastor and some other men of God, and felt like that was the will of God. And so I preached on a Wednesday night, and he went home to be with the Lord on that next Thursday.
Oh, wow.
So I worked for him for a day.
Wow.
And and that was also the week before Thanksgiving and holidays, things of that nature. And so I talked to the men and counseled with some pastors, and they said, look, get them to the holidays. So we stayed and preached Sundays and Wednesdays, and the Lord blessed. And then in January, they approached me about voting on me as pastor.
Yeah.
And so it really wasn't, just a straight call like, hey, we need a pastor, would you come? I was kind of already in place, and I was actually Brother Perry's choice to be the next pastor.
Okay.
He kind of set it up that way, and then the church voted us in. We've been there 7 years. I'm thankful for my wife because, man, we got married in September, and we went to the church in November.
Wow.
I mean, right off the bat. And so pretty much our whole marriage we've been pastoring.
Wow.
And so it was a very unique situation. Learned a lot of things and still have a lot of things to learn. But I'm thankful how the Lord's worked. And the church that I took, the pastor had a brand new church building. He was very good, had doctrinal things down, so I didn't have to clean up false doctrine or anything like that. That was a blessing.
Amazing.
So thank God for that. So I'm thankful the Lord's put me. We're at 7 years. And Brother Tim Ramsey was picking at me the other day. He said, 7 years? He says, does that mean the tribulation period's over and you're kicking off the millennium? And I said, well, I don't know about that. But the Lord has been good to us, and I'm thankful for that. So,
Amen.
Yes,
Amen. Well, Brother Zack, give us a little bit of your background as far as your testimony of salvation, testimony called to preach, and then we'll talk about how things worked out for you to become pastor at Roanoke.
Sure. So I got saved when I was 6 years old, so pretty young, and I got saved in actually a missions Sunday. Dr. John O'Malley was preaching, and it was a Sunday night. Got saved, and so being saved at that young age, you kind of you don't have much of a relationship with the Lord.
Yeah.
And I mean, not that you can't at that young of an age, but I didn't. Sure. And so growing up, I was always in church. My pastor, obviously my grandfather, mom and dad, very active, working in the church. And so we were always in church, but I just didn't have that, desire to be spiritual.
Yeah.
And then in 2008, at Brother Andy Wells' youth camp, Brother Barry Rackley was actually preaching. He was preaching a message. I don't really remember what the message was, but he made a statement in his message, and he said, don't live a little life for a big God. And that stuck with me. And I went home. I took a 5x7 note card. I wrote that on a note card, and I tacked it to my bathroom window, my bathroom mirror. And I looked at that every day for probably, I don't know, it was probably there for over 10 years. And so that just kind of became my goal, don't live a little life for a big God. And to surrender my heart to the Lord there at the youth camp in 2008. Then in 2009, in the spring, in March the 9th, actually, 2009, there was a revival service going on at Mount Sinai Baptist Church in Pickens, South Carolina. But Mark Stroud preached a revival, ended up going 9 weeks.
Yes.
And it was, I think, the second week, it going on the second week, and we moved our service over there for a Wednesday night. And that Wednesday night, I was sitting with my grandfather and sitting there in the pew. And if you know anything about that revival, they sang that song, God's Been Good in My Life. They sang it about every night. And it would just get on, and, man, it was good. I think like 110 people got saved, something like that.
Wow.
And it was amazing, one of the greatest meetings that I've had the privilege of being in. And that Wednesday night, it was like I blacked out when the service started. I was under such deep conviction.
Yeah.
I had no idea what was going on in the service, no idea what went on to this day in that service. But I just remember sitting there and about couldn't breathe, felt like I was going to pass out, and just leaning over my grandpa and saying, the Lord's calling me to preach.
Wow.
He had been dealing with me for about 6 months, and I finally, at that point, it was just do or die.
Yeah.
And so we went to the altar, and I surrendered. And the only thing I remember about that service is after I surrendered to preach, when I came to, I guess, because when the conviction came off.
He was slain in the spirit. Wow.
When the conviction came off of it, Brother Stroud was exhorting, and I remember he was running up and down the aisles preaching on the axe head, and just swing your axe, swing your axe, swing your axe, and that really stuck in me. That's what Lord called me to do. And so since then, just been preaching in the church,
right.
Sunday school, just whatever my pastor needed. I tried to be that.
Yeah.
And then in 2015, my pastor he had a heart attack right after Christmas in 2014, and so January of 2015 he was having some surgeries and things like that, and he just didn't have the strength to preach 3 times a week, right. And so the church voted me in as assistant pastor, and that was, of course, it was a blessing. I was able to do that for almost 3 years. Man, it was a difficult time in my life.
Yeah.
Because, for one, I wasn't married, of course, and taking on that role for my pastor, given the circumstance, there's a burden of him in this, health condition with a heart attack. And then there were some other men in the church that wanted that position.
Yeah.
And so there was a little bit of strife there. There was people that said, because I wasn't married, that I wasn't qualified to be any type of pastor.
Right.
And so because assistant pastor is in the name, they said I couldn't do that.
Yeah.
And so there were a few people that left the church. You feel responsible for that.
Oh, yeah.
You're just trying to help out your grandfather, help out your
yeah.
pastor. And that was a difficult time, but we got through it. The Lord blessed. And was able to pastor for about 2.5 years. Be the assistant pastor for about 2.5 years. And about a half a year to a year into that, my pastor approached me and said that he was going to be retiring soon, and said, "I want you to take the church."
Yeah.
Of course, when he says that the first time, you're like, "Wonderful, that's great."
Yeah.
I'm excited. But then, moving forward from that, as that kind of that day kind of approached, I didn't really know when the day was coming. It just kind of became something in my mind that, like, you know what, I don't think I can do this.
Yeah.
I don't think I can pastor the church that I've been in my whole life. I don't think I can pastor. My grandpa wants to stay here. My parents go here. My family goes here.
Yeah.
I don't think I can pastor my family, And one thing led to another. Eventually got to the point where pastor in June of 2018, he announced to the church that it would be his last month.
Wow.
So starting 1st of July 2018, that he would no longer be the pastor. And the deacons formed the pulpit committee and immediately came to me and said that we prayed about it. You're the only man that the Lord puts on our heart, and we're all in agreement. We want you to, at least candidate to take the church. And I told him no. I said, I don't think I can do it. And at the time, I had it in my mind. I was leaving. I was moving away. And I was going somewhere else. And I had everything figured out. And I told him no. And the Lord began to deal with my heart. And I thought I was going to die. And basically what broke me was the Lord finally got a hold of me and said, "You can go if you want to, but I'll never touch you again. I'll never use you again. But you can go if you want to." And I went to my pastor and just broken and just wept. I didn't know what to do. And he said, "You just need to tell him what the Lord told you." And so I told the deacons, I said, "I know I told you no, but the Lord's about to kill me." And I said, if you still want me, if you're still in agreement, I will at least submit to having you bring me before the church if that's your desire. And they were still all in agreement. And then in August of 2018, the church voted 100%. And so I've been pastor ever since.
Wow. You made a couple statements in there. You were talking about people not liking the fact that you had this pastor title and you wasn't married yet. A lot of people have different beliefs on that stuff.
Right.
And, somebody might have cut you off right there. I just thought, you don't have to believe that, Lord.
Yeah.
How people get to different places in their life, there's different paths, different ways that it happens. But it's amazing how the Lord right or wrong, he works it all together, you know. And to me, it's apparent that the Lord wanted you there by whatever means necessary, and it sounds like it all went according to His plan. And who are we to argue with the plan of God, you know? Right. And so, man, that's really good. And I remember that service you're talking about. I remember what Brother Rackley preached. He preached on reaching your full potential. Amen. I was there in that service, and man, that's a blessing right there.
You know, something he said that's similar in both of our situations. Of course, Brother Shook is still with us, still preaching things of that nature. But in both situations, the former pastor put his hand on the next man.
Yes.
Right. And I know that's not able in every situation.
No.
There's some men leave with a bad testimony, bad rap. But right. I tell you, if it's a man that's retiring or coming down to the end of his ministry, and he spent his life there, who better knows the heart of that church, than that pastor?
Absolutely.
And I think a church, if they got a good man of God that served them well, I think they're doing a great disservice not to ask their pastor, who do you think we should get?
And I'm still a young man in this. I have been in the ministry about a little over 18 years, but I still consider myself very young, and I have not seen near what most men have seen. Sure. I've not seen what you've seen, and we've all seen different things, different aspects in that regard. But, you know, it just seems like a lot of times the church is not ready to put together the plan, the process, to find the right man. Right. And if that, like you said, if that outgoing pastor, whether by death or whether by health decline, either way, if he can put his hands on a man, like you said, he knows the heart of that church. Exactly. He knows those people, and that always seems to be what works out best. It's not 100% foolproof. I'm sure men have missed it down through the years in you know, choosing their successor and. Sure. Or what have you, you know, if you miss it in what message you preach, you can miss it in other ways, you know. And so I'm sure that can be done. But that seems to be, in most of the time, that works out pretty good. And so praise the Lord for that. Well, let me ask y'all a few questions. Again, I've never pastored. I don't know what that's like. Brother Josh, you come from having grown up in the ministry in a pastor's home. You had an expectation. What are the things that you expected that were true when you got to the pastorate at Safe Harbor?
Preaching 3 times a week.
Wow.
And I know that sounds, you know, pretty elementary, but, you know, you think, okay, you're going to preach 3 times a week. You can go make hospital visits. You're going to get missionary calls, book revivals, you know, all the good things. That you expect, and it does happen.
So those were the expectations.
Those are some expectations. I know it's not real deep. Those are expectations you have, because I grew up in a pastor's home, and I saw things. So I kind of had more of a, and I know my dad gets calls 3 a.m. go to the hospital. Yes. Stuff like that. It wasn't shock to me. Right. So I expected stuff like that. Right. Emergency calls, getting called away from family meals, family events. Those things wasn't a shock to me. Those were things I expected because I grew up in a pastor's home and I saw that. So those things wasn't really a shock to me in that regard.
Brother Zach, you grew up a little bit different, kind of in the ministry, being there with your grandpa all those years, and of course your family is full of people that have served in the ministry. What are the things that you expected and you knew, all right, this is true, this is going to happen? What were those things?
Well, like Brother Josh said, you know, one of the really expectations that you know there's going to be there, you know, there's just the basics, preaching 3 times a week.
Right.
But also, you know, growing up, like you said, with family in the ministry, another thing you can expect is that, you know, people are going to hurt you.
Yeah. Absolutely.
There's going to be disappointment.
That's right.
And I will say that, you know, I'm not, you know, saying that pastors never have any fun. Not saying that pastoring is a terrible job. I'm saying, you know, the joys far outweigh the bad, but there's going to be the bad.
Yeah.
And so, you know, growing up around that, you knew that's going to happen.
Yeah.
No need to be surprised by it.
Right. Brother Josh, all right, so now let's flip it around. What are the things that you expected would happen that have not happened that you can talk about? You know, well, we got to put the tag on there, right?
Well, I expected I'd have my yacht by now, and expected I'd have all those
Josh
things.
Montgomery Ministries would be full
don't
running.
get me started on that one. Some preachers I won't follow.
Hey.
Refer back to the Love Valley Revival.
Yeah. Look that one up.
Yeah. I'll be honest with you. You're gonna laugh, but when I took the church, when you're a young preacher, every grandma in the building, you're the greatest preacher I ever heard, and I believed them.
Yeah. Till you realize they had amnesia.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
To the people at Safe Harbor, I apologize.
No, but I expected, man, when I took the church, like, man, everybody's going to want to hear me preach.
Yeah.
Our church is going to grow. I'm young, got fire. I'm excited. And I thought my church would just boom and just grow.
Oh.
Yeah,
wow. I need a biscuit, man. I'm just going to be honest.
But I thought my church would just grow exponentially. And God has let us see some growth. And I'll be honest with you, every church, you get a new pastor there, immediately there's going to be some spontaneous growth because everybody wants something new.
Sure.
But then and that may not be bad, but then when you start bearing down, you start preaching, and it's more than just a young preacher getting started, and what's he going to say, what's he going to do? Well, you have to start dealing with things.
Yeah.
I knew people got bad and left church, but I didn't know the extent of the hurt.
Yeah.
All right, so I saw people hurt my dad, but I'm like, I had the mentality, get over it, I never said that, obviously, but I'm like, man, it's a big deal. Man, I'm telling you, that's something different when you're in that chair and, people you've seen that you've tried to invest in. And I know you've not been pastoring as long, but you can probably testify to this. Sometimes the people you've put more time in, you've preached their funerals, you've married their children, you've tried to help them as much as you can, and then many times they're the ones that turn on you the quickest. And that was an expectation that I should have had, but didn't quite fully understand.
Would you say that part of that is the burden that's on the pastor that's not on anybody else, and so you feel it more because of that supernatural burden that you carry?
Oh, absolutely. Because I wasn't assistant pastor for my dad, but I led him in the title, but I led the music. Right. I taught Sunday school. I preached when he was gone. I always picked around. I was unpaid assistant pastor, but I lived in the house for free, and Daddy fed me, so we worked out a deal.
That's a pretty good deal.
I ain't complaining. But like somebody get mad, I'm just like, well, go find another church. It's North Carolina. There's 5 million churches. You don't like it, go find something else and just move on with it. But I didn't understand why Dad would be so burdened and so bothered at those things until I stepped into that role as pastor. Wow. I'll tell you another thing that I did not understand as a young preacher. I didn't understand, I understand now. Don't go stand in your pastor's office on Sunday morning while he's studying, looking at him, staring at him. I just go sit in my dad's office and just look at him while he's studying. Didn't need anything, just sit there. And then after I started pastoring, people started doing that. I'm like, that's very annoying.
It is. It really.
So that's a reality that I didn't understand until I started pastoring. Sorry, that's just something on my heart.
Side note
that was on
to
my
all
heart.
the people in Salisbury.
No, they don't do that anymore. Yeah.
All right, Brother Zach, what are things that you didn't expect, but now that the ball's rolling, you've been pastoring for what, year and a half now?
Yes.
You've been pastoring for a year and a half, and what are things that you didn't expect or things that you did expect that have not turned out the way you thought they would?
Okay.
All right. So what would this be? A missed expectation, I guess. Okay. Is that what I asked you?
I'm not sure.
I don't know what
I
I
think
asked
that's right.
you.
Yeah.
Just rewind it if you want to know. So expectation that you did have or that you didn't have.
Disappointment.
Disappointment. There we go. Yeah.
To me, the biggest one, I remember, especially being a young preacher, listening to my pastor, listening to other preachers preach, and you just sit there, you're like, man, how do they know that?
Yeah.
Like, where did they get this
wisdom?
And I'm sitting there thinking, if the Lord ever lets me be pastor, I guess I'll figure it out. I guess I'll know how they know that.
Yeah.
And now I'm like, I still don't know that. You think that, people look at you as their pastor like you have the answer to all these things in the Bible. And, I've had people call me and like, well, I was watching the History Channel.
Yeah.
They said this about the Bible.
I saw
like,
Chris
what is this? I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
One thing I didn't expect was how many times I'd have to look at people and say, I don't know.
Yeah. I say I don't know a lot. I'll say another.
It's better to say that than to make up something because there's enough preachers that do that.
Oh, yeah. I'll tell you something else, too. As a young preacher, you think when at least I did, you think you go in there and every service is going to be Friday night camp meeting. I mean, the choir is going to be on, especially it's going to be on. They're going to shout you down. And you're going to find out it's not always Friday night camp meeting. Sometime it's Sunday afternoon homecoming singing.
Yeah.
Which is dead as a hammer. and that's just what happens. And you've got to learn, which I'm learning, you got to preach whether it's they're shouting the house down, whether they're sitting there like a wooden Indian. You just got to preach and preach through some things. And that's the reality that I didn't expect. All
right, so you helped your dad kind of assisting him. You helped your grandpa assisting him. Or granddad. And so let me ask you this question. Outside of the preaching, outside of actual church service, what are things that now that you're handling, I guess you would say, a lot of the administrative side of the ministry now, because you have to make decisions. You have to watch out for the financial well-being and just things like that. Things as simple as who do you get to fix certain things. I mean, you're the overseer of all of that stuff, not just what goes on in the service, but things going outside of the service. What are things that you never thought that would be something you'd have to deal with, but now that you're the pastor, it's like, whoa, I wasn't prepared for this side of the ministry. What's some of the things that you've had to deal with? And I know y'all kind of have a heads up on it, because if helping as an assistant, there were other things that you did that were not necessarily preaching and teaching and singing. So what's some of the stuff, Brother Zack, that you've dealt with that maybe somebody watching would say, oh, well, I didn't realize that was part of the ministry, and it don't really have nothing to do with service.
Right. Especially when you're a young preacher in the ministry, and you dream about taking a church, and, I would go around to different meetings and things like that and think, well, I love the way they do this ministry. I love the way that they do that ministry.
Yeah.
If I ever pastor a church, I'll do this.
Yeah.
Right. And then you get to that place. You're like, okay, I'm going to do this. And then you're like, wait, we don't have the money in the budget.
Right.
So how do we get there?
Yes.
What do we have to do what can we do to move some things around? Understanding a budget, understanding how a certain thing that you want to do, like you want to take the youth group out one night. Okay, how is this going to affect the budget and keep me from being able to do something else in the ministry?
Absolutely.
You don't think about how all that ties in together until you're responsible for it.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Other than that, I would say it's just I love Bible college. I went to Bible college. But there's a lot of things Bible college does not teach you.
Right.
That's exactly right.
That's right.
I mean, when you get a call, you're on your way to work one morning, and you get a call that my grandson's a drug addict, and I'm locked in my bedroom, and he's in the house. I need somebody to come help me.
Oh yeah.
What am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you call the preachers. The preacher's got to go deal with a drug addict.
That's right.
Somebody calls, says there's a man living under a bridge. I mean, they don't teach you how to deal with that in Bible college. I had only been pastoring a couple months, and just going to visit a widow, or she wasn't a widow at the time. Her husband had bad cancer, and I knocked on the door, and when she opened the door, she was so just relieved to see me. So I'm so glad you came. It's like, my husband's in the floor, we can't get him up.
Oh wow!
And the type of cancer that he had, you touched him, he screamed. For the next hour, you're trying to help this elderly man out of the floor.
Yeah.
And he's screaming, and you don't know what to do, and that was like a week after they voted me in as pastor. They don't teach you that in Bible college.
No, that's right.
I mean, just a few months after our first Easter as pastor, you get up and you think, Easter Sunday morning, we got visitors, we're gonna preach to the lost, all these things.
Yeah.
Get up Easter Sunday morning, get a phone call. A man in the church and family in the church, and a 25-year-old man with wife and kids, and commit suicide that night.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't teach you how to deal with that in Bible college.
That's right.
They don't teach you how to preach a funeral for somebody your age.
That's absolutely.
First funeral I ever preached was a baby.
Oh wow.
First funeral, I had been pastoring 6 months, and I had a family in the church. The baby died in the mother's womb, tragic situation. And the casket was very, very small, obviously. And then to kind of make things worse, we're having the funeral that evening, and a storm comes through and blows the power out. So we have no power in the auditorium. One of the men went and grabbed a generator and one of the big work lamps, and I preached in the dark that night to that family. They don't teach you that. I'm not being critical by
Right.
no means.
Well, they
Both
can't.
the
They
things-
can't teach
No,
you
they
that.
don't. And Brother Zach, I think you'd agree with this. Preaching is the easy part.
Exactly.
Preaching is the easy part.
That's right.
Sitting there counseling, trying to figure out, you talking about going to young preacher. I know we're getting low on time, but going to these meetings, you're like, man, I want to have a big Jubilee meeting, bring all these people in. Well, it takes money to do stuff like that. You want to do projects, you want to, praise God, let's remodel. Well, it takes money to do that. You got to look at that and counseling people.
Right.
Because as a young preacher, even as assistant pastor, maybe a little more with you having the youth group, you don't do much counseling.
No, that's right.
You don't. And when you pastor, people, especially I've been married a year and a half, and I'm having people come to me need marriage counseling.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm still trying to figure it out myself. I'm still trying to figure it out myself. But what I'm saying is, it's going to be, I'm not trying to sound funny, but you got to learn to rely on the Lord.
That's right.
Because our wisdom it goes just like
That's
that.
right. That's exactly right. I tell you, you were talking about the things that it doesn't prepare you for because it can't really prepare you for it. And there's that thought when you're counseling people and the reality sets in. And I have not. Pastor Philbeck has me do some counseling just in certain situations. He trusts me and wants me to do it to help, just certain people at certain times. But he does most of that.
Right.
But the reality set in one day, and I know it's different because I'm not a pastor, I'm assistant pastor, but the reality set in one day that they are going to take every word I say, and if it doesn't work out, now if they don't do what I say, they ain't going to think nothing about it. But if they do what I tell them to do and it doesn't work, they're going to come back and say, but you said, but you told me. And so that's a great responsibility to think that, these people they're dependent on you. Like you said, my drug addict locked me out of my house. They call you. I'm just the pastor. No, but that's it. You are their pastor. You're their spiritual lifeline, if you will.
Right.
And so I think these are things that and there's so much that I've never pastored again, so there's so much that I don't even know about it, but there's enough that I've seen in my pastor and the things he's had to deal with and just the things that you men spoke about that young men need to be very, very careful. Everybody's not meant to take a church at 21, but the Lord kind of groomed you for that. I mean, you can see that. I used to be so jealous of that, thinking, Lord, why won't you let me pastor somewhere? And then, it was a great day when I realized that God has a different plan for every person.
Right.
And so the Lord doesn't want every young preacher to go pastor a church. Some of them need to sit at the feet of the man of God, learn to work in the ministry. God has a different plan for every person. But for those of you that the Lord is grooming for pastoring, take this advice. These men are giving you great advice.
I'll say this. I know we're getting short, but I'll tell you from a pastor's perspective, and I believe he'll agree with this, and I'll use this word in the right kind of way. We envy to have a man like Brother Michael that you can lean on to help you. And I mean, I think you ask any pastor, he needs somebody to help him.
That's right.
It don't matter how big the church is, how small the church is.
That is right.
Sometimes it's just somebody there to go to the hospital with you and to help you make a visit, to have fellowship with. And so to that point, young man, God may not have you pastor a church. I think somebody said at Brother Watson's men's meeting one year, God's called every man, whether it's a preacher or not a preacher, he's called every man to be a pastor or to help a pastor.
What about that?
Amen. And I believe that's
That's
right.
pretty accurate.
Yes,
that's
sir.
pretty accurate. Amen. Well, we're fixing to cut it off, and so we hope that you'll tune in next week. Thank you for tuning in this week. Again, this is a ministry of the Love Valley Baptist Church. My pastor is Barry Philbeck here in Kings Mountain, North Carolina. And we also want to remind you to tune in to our friends over at the Higher Grounds podcast who air the Morning Minute Meditations every day, and then they also air new episodes every Monday. And so be sure you tune in and watch them as well. Well, thank you for tuning in. We hope you'll tune in again next week here at the Christian Construction Podcast.